a lot of times in fast money-burning startups, they are really spending a lot of money on personnel and resources that aren't being used efficiently, and you end up burning through a lot of venture capital, and you may not even be pointed at the right target yet.
Welcome, friends, to a podcast with interesting people. I'm Adrian Sinclair, and today my guest is Jeremy Willden from Constellation Labs, a company over here in Utah which is focusing on engineering and helping innovators bringing products from concept to reality. And we're going to be talking about a lot of different things in the space of innovation, what's happening right now. If you are an innovator, if you are an entrepreneur with ideas and you have an idea for that product, maybe it's going to change the world. Well, listen to this podcast and check out what we're going to be talking about. Jeremy, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Adrian. So glad to be here.
Thank you for stopping by. And you're a co-founder of Constellation Labs, and you guys have been in a business since 2013. And I would love to learn a little bit more about you and why you started the company and how has it been running this type of company over here. And of course, then we're going to segue into innovation and what's happening in that space over here in Utah. Utah is becoming a tech hub more and more. There's a lot of great stuff coming out of here. Tell me a little bit more about yourself before we kick off talking about your company and the cool stuff that you guys do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you, Adrian. This is a lot of fun. It was fun to connect with you through Make Salt Lake and the cool opportunities that they create for people to build and experiment and 3D print and all those kind of things, the projects that they want to do. Sometimes it helps them get to an actual product and maybe something like that. So Martin and I, who kind of put together the company, we barely even think of ourselves as co-founders. We think of ourselves more as a couple of engineers who love working with really smart people, who gathered a bunch of other engineers and we all just work together. Because it's fantastic. It's fun stuff. We were already doing some consulting. We have worked in industry for many years and worked with a lot of startups. And there was always that startup mentality of, great, let's get in a startup. It'll go big. We'll all sell it. We'll all get rich and then we can go retire. And of course, that almost never happens. It's not to compare it with a bad sports analogy, but a lot of kids who really, really want to play in the NBA or the NFL really don't get that chance. And in some ways, there's a lot of similarity to what happens in technology. Most of us just end up kind of doing jobs the rest of our lives. But those of us who really love to do it, rather than getting in a rut, if you will, with a regular company, we love to work on new and exciting products all the time. But more importantly, we want to help people become a little more autonomous so they can build their own company and grow it. We're backwards that way in that we're not trying to make people dependent on us. We're trying to work ourselves out of a job and make them be able to do what we do.
What was the inception point of starting your company? Like, were you... how did that happen? What was that deciding pivotal point when you were like, you know what, we should probably do this as a business?
So we've always done, Martin and I and most of the engineers we work with have always done little projects on the side when we were allowed to. A lot of tech companies will not let you, they'll have you sign a non-compete and all of that, and you can't do projects on your own or they own it.
Right.
Really don't like that. But to the extent we could, we'd always work on projects for friends, family, a friend of a friend, just little side jobs, working in the basement at night. Then while we're working at these startups, one of them in particular was just not growing. It wasn't doing that well. And the company was doing so badly that we were worried it was going to go under. And we said, look, we'll take ourselves off the payroll, lay ourselves off, if you will, and we'll do more consulting to pick up the slack. And then you can hire us back on when things pick up.
Right.
Well, it's been several years, since 2013 or longer, and it still hasn't picked up there, but we have been growing the company and things have been going great.
What are some of the challenges for those who are entrepreneurs and are thinking about starting a new business? What are some of the challenges that you guys had to deal with and overcome, especially now when you have COVID and a lot of businesses, especially small businesses, going out of business? It's difficult for people to jump in, right, and to really get into like, okay, I should start a business right now because of that risk factor. Well, obviously, when you guys started that, you didn't have that problem. But share some of the lessons learned from building a company, starting a new company. Would you do anything different now? What would you do? Share some tips, pro tips.
Absolutely. And I want to make sure I circle back to talk a little bit about people who are out of work and are looking for new opportunities, because I have a high level of compassion and feeling for them. And I don't want to minimize that aspect of this. I don't want it to sound too much like everything's just golden and everything will just work out. But the way we started out was by starting small, starting to do a few things on the side. That really actually was a benefit to us, that company never really grew, because we were able to start things on the side to fill the gaps. And then as we found that company was doing worse and worse, we continued to grow our business. So it gave us the runway, if you will, the time to figure out what to do and how to do it in the best way.
So sometimes growing too fast is not good for the business.
Oh, yeah, very much so. A lot of times in fast money-burning startups, they are really spending a lot of money on personnel and resources that aren't being used efficiently, and you end up burning through a lot of venture capital, and you may not even be pointed at the right target yet.
Right.
So with a lot of our clients, we try to understand, what's their budget, what is their constraint, and in some cases their budget is basically zero, and we'll simply spend as much time as we can afford out of our busy schedules to help encourage them, suggest resources that they can learn from, or other ways to build it, or help them find a financing partner if it comes to that. Not everyone is a good fit for that, to help them so that they can actually start and launch their company.
What are some of the challenges, if you could go back in time and do some of the things differently in terms of starting a company? Would you do anything different?
I don't know that there's a lot that we would change about the way we started our company, but we have learned a lot from other mistakes we've seen, other issues that we've seen people go through. And I probably won't be able to come up with all of them all at once right now, but one of them is launching a product really before it's ready. And ready in this case means doing enough testing so that you've worked out enough of the kinks, so that it's not going to fall flat on its face with your first testers.
Market validation?
Yeah, do some validation testing, black and white box, all of that. And if you don't understand those terms, look into them a little bit. But mainly test the user experience. What's it really like? Hand it to somebody who's never seen the product before. If it's not a physical product, have them test your app or whatever it is. But get real, honest feedback from them. Tell them up front, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I know this is still a work in progress. And make sure, most importantly, take very detailed notes on everything they say. Better yet, record the conversation so you can play it back later, as long as they're comfortable with that. And go through it step by step. Record them interacting with your product or your app or your idea. Does it really work the way they want it to? But ultimately what you're trying to solve is a pain point. And if your product doesn't reduce somebody's pain, whether that pain is extra cost or inconvenience or something like that, you may not have the right product yet.
Right. It could be that it's so great in your mind, it's such a beautiful product in your brain, but then you're like, is it really needed? I mean, you think the market needs it, but it's only through that market validation when you're going to talk to someone and say, like, hey, is there really room for this, or what do you think about this? Or better yet, build a prototype. Never in the history has it been so easy right now. The ramp to building a prototype, and then rapid prototyping of trying and enhancing, fixing, and learning from that cycle than ever before. Right now, it's just it's so much easier than before to build something, especially if something physical.
Yeah, and when you're trying to take some of that feedback, try not to get too discouraged just because somebody says, well, I don't need that. It's not actually anything useful that I would ever care about. Remember back when Steve Jobs and Apple introduced the first iPhone, and they said, you'll have a web browser on your phone. I was still among the people that had the mindset of the BlackBerry as the smartphone. With the keyboard and the tiny little screen, there were no mobile optimized websites. And my first thought was, I don't really think I'm going to need a web browser on my phone. And obviously, the world has changed completely since then, because the web browser is a completely different thing than it was then. The same thing can apply to your idea, but be careful if you're trying to shift the world's perceptions too far, too fast. You may come too early and end up being the failed case, and then somebody else comes along, does it a little bit differently, and they become massively successful on your idea.
I'll share a little story about that myself. In 2000, end of .com, I'm dating myself over here a little bit. End of .com, year 2000, my partners and I, we came up with an idea of two-dimensional barcode being implemented the way QR code right now is. And this is way before the phones had cameras. And we were pitching this idea, and the investors, angels, they could not, which was amazing and amusing to us, because they could not really put their mind on into the idea that phones will have cameras. When they were like, why would you want to have a camera in a phone? It's just silly. It's going to be, sucky quality. It's bulky, maybe all these different no's to that. And we're like, well, yeah, but look at technology is improving so fast, and you're going to have cameras in the phones. And lo and behold, a couple of years later, they were. But we were too early, what you said. We were too early to the market with that. We were literally too ahead of the time. Later on, it became what everybody knows right now as the QR code, where you can just kind of point your phone at this two-dimensional barcode, and it takes you to a website, or some kind of action happens. And it's amazing. So timing is critical, isn't it?
So true. Yeah, being in the right place at the right time, solving the right thing at the right time. But there is a lot to it, and because we're engineers, we're very focused on the engineering side of things, and we often encourage, especially if we have a client come to us that they don't have the business background. If they created the prototype, they may be a mechanical whiz, they may be a software whiz, and we're helping them with a few other parts. We have to encourage them, make sure you look at the business side of this. Make sure you have a business model that's viable. Now, a viable business model might be, I'm going to go and get $10 million in venture funding, burn through that, and then ultimately we're going to have an advertiser-driven business model. But most startups are going to have a hard time going through those kind of ramp-ups. So you need to have a viable business model early on. And we've gone through that with a few different clients, and some of them have done it very well and have very successful business models, and others have not done it so well, and they struggle to continue their product to market. When we see red flags like that, in fact, we'll try and give them just enough hints, letting them know that we're not business experts, but they should really look into some of these areas. But typically, those that have struggled eventually pivot and find a better business model, and sometimes that means they don't need our help at all, and sometimes that means they need us more.
That's interesting. So your company is not only helping with prototyping and all the engineering part, the electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, software development, but also from like a business perspective, just kind of like an honest feedback, like, hey, you should be probably thinking about these things because we want you to succeed as well.
Yeah.
And as great of a product you may develop, if there's no need in the market or you don't have a viable business, then you will be out of business before you will really be in business.
Right.
And this reminds me of how back in the day, grain mills were made, mills that you grind grain with, and they were cast iron so robustly built that these companies were literally going out of business because these things can work for hundreds of years, like the oldest one like 150 years, and it's still running and it's still doing its job, and so like their business model kind of
can't
like
sell anymore.
Exactly, like they were so good that they basically ran out of business because nobody needed to buy more. So it's interesting kind of dynamic. Maybe now, of course, there's a pendulum swings to the other side. Right now, we have built-in obsolescence, right?
Everything's disposable.
Exactly, disposable. Or we have these, even though you could better engineer it so it wouldn't break down, the business model, it would not support the business model. So you're going to have some kind of built-in obsolescence where things will break down or just break, and you're going to have to replace them or fix them.
Yeah, and I'm a little concerned about that in a lot of ways. The repairability scores on a lot of devices have gone down. And yes, I'm a tinkerer, so I tend to be the kind of person who would be more likely to be able to fix something. But just the amount of stuff that ends up in landfills, even with the European directive on recycling and things like that, I have concerns about what's going where, and I don't want to be so far off in the extreme that I come across as being crazy. We don't want any technology at all, but we do need to strike the right balance of protecting the future as well as having the technologies that can help make lives better now.
I just wrote down something to remind myself because I definitely want to put a bookmark in this, what you just talked about. and I want to bring it back to open source hardware, where some of these issues could be addressed, and I want to talk about that, but I don't want to sidetrack too much.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, I know you mentioned a lot of different things, but what would be the top sort of three things that you would think would be key elements for these entrepreneurs or these innovators, inventors, the top three things to succeed in bringing a product to the market?
Ooh, there are, I'll probably pick top three that are maybe not the top three, so forgive me a little bit. One is definitely test and get feedback. You want to know what the user experience is going to be for whatever type of product you're designing. Second of all, make sure you build a reasonable business foundation. Read the books and set up whatever structure provides you with the right organization. If it's just you running on your own, you might be able to do it as just filing whatever it is, the Schedule C on your taxes as a personal whatever. But in a lot of these, you're going to want to set up some type of limited liability company or S corporation or something like that. Talk to a CPA about the financial side. If you've got a friend who's an attorney, you may not need to actually hire an attorney to do a lot of stuff, though it's very good if you can afford to do so. But talk to them about legal structures, because if you by yourself are not going to be able to bring something to market, and you're going to need 3 or 4 or 5 other really core, talented people involved in this, make sure the structure is set up so that you don't burn bridges with those people if you don't, and you definitely don't want to treat them unfairly. There's some great books and resources out there. A book called Slicing Pie that helps you make dynamic equity slices work really well. Again, within Constellation, because all of us as engineers, almost all the money that comes in just flows through to us, and the company is really just there to provide us with a little liability protection and to have a face for all of us. We tend not to have those kinds of issues. But people starting product companies, it really pays to figure some of these things out ahead of time,
right? So
you don't get in trouble down the road and have to sort these things out years down the road when suddenly the company's now worth something.
So you're kind of ready for it. So first one would be market testing. Second, set up the appropriate vessel for the business. So
and another one's probably some type of intellectual property protection. And the term intellectual property is a little bit a misnomer in some ways, but patents and trademarks are the kind, and copyrights on the code, of course. The way we do it when we create code, we have a non-disclosure agreement which says we won't share anything we discuss with our clients outside unless we've been given approval to do so. But we also have another clause in there that assigns anything that we create, the intellectual property, they own it. It's very important that if you just have your buddy down the street writing code, find some type of contract that officially assigns that IP to you, or they could come back later and they could have a copyright claim against you. Watch out for those kind of things, because some of the best businesses will get spoiled by those, and some of them that never really succeed, the problem never comes up because no one ever sees that there's money coming in.
Anything else in terms of keeping things? So definitely create a right corporation or a vessel for doing business, to be able to protect intellectual property as well. Market validate your product. For those who have started building a prototype, they have an idea and they are starting to maybe not yet validate the market vibe, with the product. What other resources have you found that they can kind of lean on to help? Other than, because obviously you can ask your family, like, hey, what do you think about it, and your friends, but you may get some biased, feedback like, oh, no, it's great. No, it's awesome. We love it, right? Nobody wants to hurt your feelings. Are there any resources out there other than maybe asking strangers on the street what I think about it?
Yeah. So when you're talking to people like that, you want to, anybody really, it's a good idea. And I know a lot of companies don't do this, and it turns out okay for them. But do try to find a boilerplate non-disclosure agreement of some kind that you can sign with some of those people, just so you have some type of official papering of the relationship, so that, yes, as your buddy, your friend, they're not going to go blab your idea intentionally, but they might mention it unintentionally offhand, and at least the NDA provides a little bit of legal protection there. But also it helps them realize, this is an idea I'm pretty serious about, and it will make them less likely to accidentally drop it in a conversation because they know, we signed that thing, I wasn't going to tell anybody about it. But a really good place to get feedback is like the makerspaces. There are a lot of other people there with a lot of different experiences. There are people who are amazing woodworkers and others who are amazing with the 3D printers and building the models, and people who are just really good with their hands, and others who are great at visualizing things. And in some of them, you'll find people who are really good at software. And if you can bounce ideas off people like that, maybe you could even organize an event, they may already have these, where people can kind of pitch their ideas and get feedback from a group, where it's in a protected session so that people aren't going to steal the ideas, at least not officially.
Right.
That could get you some feedback. I would tend to keep it kind of on the small side first. Try and be real careful, but especially if you're worried about people trying not to hurt your feelings, tell them, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I'm going to spend a lot of time on this if you really think it's good. So you'll hurt my feelings if you tell me it's good and you really don't think it is.
Well, that's actually a very good way of reframing that. I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that's just kind of like shifting a point of view. Like, hey, if you're going to do more harm, if you're going to give me, dishonest or like maybe like padded feedback versus like, hey, help me improve this product.
Yeah, I had one thought actually, if at the risk of shifting our conversation a little bit, I'm going to pivot us tiny bit towards education stuff and encouraging youth and kids and things like that. I find that both in just working with people in general, but especially when trying to train and encourage kids to get into technology, that often it's always about turning and changing their perspective a little bit. Because if you go into a classroom and you're telling kids, you really need to learn how to code, to put it in more familiar terms, you're going into an English class and saying, you need to learn how to spell and diagram sentences.
Right.
Well, that's not that interesting. That's actually kind of boring stuff. But if you're going in and teaching them, look, here, what's your favorite novel? We're going to teach you how to write a novel. That's the kind of way I love to teach and encourage younger entrepreneurs, engineers.
So more like goal driven in the sense that, hey, this awesome thing is the goal, and you can make it happen. A novel or some kind of a widget or gadget. Yeah. But in order to get there, you need to learn these basic things.
It's about problem solving. You have that long-term goal in mind. You have it in your head. I want to write the great American novel, the great French novel, whatever it is for our friends in other countries. But just learning how to write and diagram a sentence doesn't do it. Similarly, when learning technology, just learning how to code, well, you've learned the syntax and the language of C or Python or Java or whatever, or C#. But that doesn't mean you've learned how to solve the problems. Right. And by actually doing some exercises, not just the basic canned stuff that you'd find just in an ordinary book, but a real world problem, then it's much more exciting because you're doing something. And in your case, the Arduinos of the world, I can connect up a camera to it and connect it to Wi-Fi, and now my Arduino is my doorbell cam. Right. And I built it myself. Yes, the commercially available ones are amazing and great, but wow, I built it myself and made it work. Right. It can be much more inspiring. And then when somebody says, well, can I make it now have a Bluetooth module and detect when my phone comes to the front door and do something automatically? Yes, you can. Right. You can't do that with the commercial products as much.
It's amazing what's possible right now with computers, with resources that are so much cheaper, controllers. We talk Arduino, Raspberry Pi, all those different computers that are literally $25, $35, very, very cheap, very inexpensive to do. And there's a lot of resources out there to get you going. Yeah. But I want to plug in over here Make Salt Lake, which is we met through Make Salt Lake, which is an organization over here in Utah, and it's a space where you have available resources from 3D printers to machines to laser engravers to lathes, everything that you can possibly almost think of. You can access, just paying like monthly membership very inexpensively for access to all of that. And not only that, like you said yourself, access to all those different people who are in that space, those creators, creative minds that are working on something, tinkering. And I found, back in Maryland, I was a member of Baltimore Hackerspace, and it was a space where, similar again, just makerspace, where I found how open and how much people wanted to share and help you, getting excited about your project and helping you out. And it was just an amazing space to kind of nourish that idea that you have. A lot of times you may be working on an idea that is in your head, and then you have that difficulty kind of like getting into that, spinning up that flywheel to get that momentum going. But when you are in those spaces and you start talking to people, they give you an ideas or tips or suggestions, or it's a wonderful place to kind of to expand.
And that getting spun up that I see, a lot of what you're getting there, I think, at least in my experience in makerspaces, and by the way, don't feel bad if you're nowhere near Salt Lake. There are makerspaces all across the country. And if there isn't one, start one. They're fantastic. You could start with just a 3D printer in a little single room borrowed from somebody. But getting spun up, you have certain areas of interest and expertise. You've seen a project, you want to do something, but there are portions that you absolutely have confidence you can do, and there are parts that you kind of have an idea, and there are parts you maybe have no idea at all. And by talking to the other people in the makerspaces, first of all, they help you fill in the part you kind of know about and point you to resources to learn about the stuff you totally don't know about, but may also be somebody that's good to partner with and work together with. Yeah,
it's a critical thing to surround yourself with resources that kind of take you through those patches where you have gaps in knowledge, because those may just stop you cold, right? You're like, hey, well, I don't know how to code, or I really don't know how to do this. But once you start networking, and especially if it's an exciting project, others may just want to join you, right? And it's a wonderful place, again, those maker spaces to kind of prototype and build that 1.0 version product that you can validate on the market, even in that community. And my experience with working in that kind of a creative community is that people are excited about building, and they genuinely want to help you. They want to share information. They want to share things, and so that's a great, I think, platform to kind of start before you're going to actually hit the commercial side of it. And then if you want to take it to the professional level, that's where they can kind of come into a company like yours, where you guys have dedicated professionals working these things in and out, and having been through the whole pipeline, right, of taking a product from concept or from like that 1.0 version and then making it better. Yeah. Any projects that you can share some information about that kind of fit that scheme? Or
I'd love to. I brought along, I'll tell you quickly about a couple of big ones that we've worked on before. One of them, because I couldn't bring it because it takes the space of a couple of giant banquet tables. But some of our projects are really elaborate and involved. For the Utah State University, they still have this amazing lab where they create artificial spider webs. And they have, of all things, really Google it, because it's unbelievable if I just say it. Genetically modified goats that were crossed genetically with spiders, and they produce spider silk protein in the goat's milk.
That just scares me.
It's just weird. I mean, you conjure up images of goats web slinging through the city like Spider-Man, right? They actually have a poster like that.
Spider goats?
Yes, the spider goats are there, and it's in the. But really, so they had this first generation of the machine, just a little tiny thing, and they asked us to design them a full-blown version. They said, we want to add sensors, we want to measure how strong it is, we want to have drying and all these other special features, and we built the entire thing. This ginormous machine, and set it up there. They still use it to this day, and they have added to it in light of the way we do business. We didn't just build them a machine and walk away, and then if they wanted something else, they have to come back to us. We trained them how it worked. We built it in a programming environment that they can easily extend. It has big touch screens and a big powerful computer on it. At least it was powerful in the day. Now a Raspberry Pi will probably overdo it, right? But that machine is up there extruding out the filaments and goes through all these series of rotating wheels and stretches it and everything like that. I mean, you can look it up. They're building some amazing things with it. And those artificial spider webs, you're like, what is the purpose of that? Am I going to make a bulletproof vest? Well, it's actually pretty flexible. So if you make a bulletproof vest, yes, it'll stop the bullet, but it will have stretched so far the bullet would have gotten partway through you. It wouldn't be a good thing. They actually use it for medical things, potentially. They might be using it in the future for sutures when they're doing eye surgeries or things like that, because they're biocompatible. So they have amazing things to do with that. So we do these large, elaborate products, but some of them are really basic, simple things. One of them I mentioned when we talked the first time was a tiny little a light switch or faceplate cover. So walk around your house, you see there's an outlet on the wall. You can pull out the existing one, pop in this new one, and it has little lights on the bottom, guide lights. So when you walk around in the middle of the night and your very creative children have left their Lego out and you step on them and it hurts really bad, with these guide lights you can see the Lego and step around them.
Right.
And it's a very simple looking product, but to make it work in a way that it could be approved by safety authorities and all of that, and not have to be wired in by an electrician, took quite a bit of work, and we helped them with some of that. And they're a very successful company. They make great products. But the one that I really brought that's very inspiring is a company started by a retired or former firefighter. And he had gone into a lot of homes where sadly fires had started because someone had left their stove on. And it was very, very sad. Of course, I don't know if any deaths had actually occurred that he had firsthand been involved in, but that's a really sad situation. He wanted to make the world a better place. And he said, if I can just make a box that goes behind the stove, and when it hears the smoke alarm go off, it turns off the stove, we could save a lot of lives. So he went out, he got it prototyped. I don't know all of the details of his story because we joined in quite a bit later. He went on Shark Tank and I believe he got funded, and he has been very successful. And it's a great product. It saves lives. I even brought one with me just so you can see the cool box that he designed. Well, as it turns out, the first version worked great in most situations, but there are certain fire alarms that don't conform to the normal ones. They're a little bit different. They act differently. And there are also noises like a vent fan, the overhead fan that pulls the smoke out of the kitchen. Those make noise that make it not work as well. It can't always detect the fire alarms, or it detects them when it's not supposed to, and turns off your stove when you're in the middle of cooking something. And they wanted some assistance with this. So we came in, helped them upgrade the processor, added some digital signal processing. The thing now listens and does some really amazing stuff that I can't share how it does it, but it does some incredible stuff and can pull fire alarms out of background noise and loud rock music and things that it couldn't do before. And again, they already had a company going. We just helped them take what they had and made it just a little bit better. And they are continuing to thrive, and this new version of the product we think is going to help, again, save more lives and make the world a better place. And that's what we love doing, is helping improve lives.
Right. I mean, may I see it?
Yes, please.
I so want one of these. I think it's such a smart idea that I'm just blown away that this is not like even built into I mean, this is such a no-brainer in terms of like this should be just a built-in. Now I get it that it seems to be a simple problem to solve, but like all those edge cases that you just mentioned, for instance, like music playing loudly and just kind of background noise that's going to be obfuscating the alarm going off or something like that. So definitely some brain power into this to kind of recognize when that alarm is going off. But in theory, very simple solution. Like, hey, fire alarm goes off, turn off this potential source of fire. So it's amazing. I definitely want one of these.
And just so nobody thinks that I'm taking credit for much of this, it's a bunch of the other engineers on our team that did most of the really important brain work to figure out how to do this well and effectively, and reject the false ones and really capture and pull the true alarms out of the noise. Even if there are a whole bunch of alarms going off in the same building at the same time, it's really amazing what it can do now as a better version of the product. But it's still just a little improvement over a genius idea had by this firefighter who is now building his own company around it.
I want to invite him on the show and talk to him.
We got to get you connected.
Yeah,
he's great.
I would love to, just to kind of hear the story of the inception of that idea, right? Yeah. I mean, as a firefighter, he saw a lot of causes of the fire, and it's like that's just kind of like a no-brainer. But still, somehow nobody else got to it first, right? And then this makes me think also about, because we kind of stepped through so far how a progression of an invention happens. You have an idea. There's lots of ideas out there. And unless you execute, unless you really bring it to the market, test and validate it on the market, it still is just an idea. Taking it to the next level where you are building something yourself, prototyping, maybe working in and the creative circles like maker spaces where you can kind of maybe lean on some of the knowledge and expertise of others to help you out in those gaps that you may have, building something to the next level, and then taking it to the pro level when it's going to be really ready for the market. This is where I see like companies like yours really playing that additional function, because not only the device or the invention has to be functional, but has to satisfy all these things that you wouldn't think of. Like when I look at this box that turns off, electricity to a stove when it detects fire alarm going off. I mean, functionally, that's fairly simple, but there's a lot of regulations that you have to think about. There's a lot of things that you have to test and prove that this thing is going to really work in these, edge case scenarios. And that's something that you guys have experience with and you guys can bring to the table. So that kind of, to me, that's kind of like that additional value that you guys are bringing in, because you've been in this space for so long that you already know what to look for in order to get it certified, to get it, approved by authorities where those approvals and regulations need to be satisfied.
Yeah, because things like wireless products, you have to take them through FCC testing, and you have to know that if that product is going to be close to a person, there's something else called specific absorption rate testing. A cell phone held up to your head, we don't want to overheat the brain cells, right? There are all regulations all around that to make sure people are protected from the very technologies we're trying to make their lives better with. Because we are aware of most of those, we know at least where to point them, get them aligned with the right testing labs, and design them as best we can from the get-go, that it should pass and should be safe from the beginning. Excuse me, but like you were asking, this whole process, first of all, we're a little different than a lot of firms in many, and incidentally, if you're trying to produce a product, there are a lot of firms out there that will take it from beginning to end. They'll even manufacture it for you. We've intentionally stayed out of the manufacturing business. We'd rather give you the option of manufacturing anywhere with anyone that you want. So we're a little weird that way too.
Do you have some resources that you can share and point them to?
Oh yeah, we have a network of manufacturers we have worked with, and we're happy to work with anyone that they are comfortable with. If they have a specific mold and tool maker for injection molded plastics or circuit board manufacturer, we're happy to work with any of them that way.
Because that's one of those things that an inventor, especially first-time inventor, has no idea how to, you want me to produce it somewhere in China or somewhere else so it's cheaper and all that stuff. No idea. How do you build those relationships and learn from all those mistakes? You want to go with someone who already has that experience and can point you to the right resources.
Right, and especially if it's somebody that they trust, even if it's just one little part of their team that knows a specific manufacturer of a single piece that isn't even necessarily that consequential, that person, as your friend, confidant, might be able to give you some good insights into these other manufacturers or other organizations. Are they really a good fit for you? So as we try and help them through the process, some, again, have already built a full prototype and they just need help taking it to production. Others need help with the prototype and they're okay with manufacturing, or they may need the entire spectrum of help. And we'll try and help in the ways that we can without being a burden on them and doing unnecessary things that, they could have done that themselves, as long as they're willing and interested. We ask them to have someone on their team that works with us, design reviews, and knows the code. They'll have direct access to source code repositories and know everything about the product. So if all of us, as I say to them, if we all go get hit by a bus, you'll still have everything. And you can pick up the pieces and continue on without, you may miss us, but for the most part, without missing a beat.
So we talked about the sort of top three things that innovators who want to bring product to the market should think about in order to succeed. Conversely, what are some of the things or some of the failures that you've seen, or the most often things that inventors and entrepreneurs do that increase their chances to fail? And some lessons learned that you've seen. What are some of the things that you would recommend people kind of have in the back of their minds, or here's some of the failures that I've seen. Avoid those. The
one that we even alluded to a little bit more is if you don't test something enough and immediately release it to the open market, you're probably going to end up with some disappointed customers. So it's very important to do good testing, user experience testing. And again, I know that's a buzzword, but let somebody try it out and get honest feedback on how does it work, will they use it, things like that. Another thing that they tend to get in trouble with, and it's a little less the product itself, but simply the organization of the company. If they're setting the expectations to everybody that they're working with that this is great, we're going to totally blow it out of the water and we'll all be millionaires by the end of next year, you're setting yourself up for a pretty high expectation. You're putting the bar pretty high, and it can be very disheartening to you and everyone you work with. So be careful what expectations you set. At the same time, you want to be very open and honest with them about this is what we think something's going to be as we sell it, and it may or may not. If you're in that sort of leadership role, definitely look at some of the great books you can find on Amazon and whatever about leadership. I'm personally a big fan of Dave Ramsey and his financial advice and leadership advice. So I'd always recommend looking at some of his stuff. In fact, one thing we never really circled back to is, in the age of COVID, how do we start a business? There are people that are going to be a little worried about this right now, frankly.
Or not start a business at all because they're just, the risks are too high and we don't know what's happening next. So how do people cope with that? So
some of our clients have had to put the brakes on products, especially some of our clients that are out of state. We've been a little less affected here in the Utah, so-called Silicon Slopes area, just because, well, I don't know exactly why, but there is something a little different about the culture here that hasn't slowed us down as much as it has in some other areas. And that's worked out fine for all of us. We, again, following the ideals of trying to have a rainy day fund and all of that, it's been kind of a non-event because we have been prepared for it. But some of our clients have had to completely stop because their big investor has put the money on hold. Right. And in that case, I'd say to somebody who is maybe not quite in that exact situation, but trying to decide, do a lot of it yourself. Learn a lot yourself. There are so many online free resources. Right. Get on YouTube and get on some of these other online learning platforms and video sharing platforms. Get on the websites of the 3D printer forums and find out what you can do, how you can do it. And if you don't know, again, go look at a makerspace, talk to some people, and look for some resources. Because starting a company when things are crazy, financially or whatever, and even if it's not COVID-19, it'll be something else.
Hopefully not COVID-20.
Yes, please. We don't need any more of this.
We're done with that.
2020 has been a crazy year. We don't need more of that. But there will always be some kinds of bumps in the road, and being prepared for them is important. But in a lot of ways, I hate to make this whole conversation about Constellation Labs and us, and I'd like to talk more about kind of, in general, more entrepreneurship. But we were already prepared for it in that we all worked from home offices. We rented a little office space that we'd use for meetings and have a conference room, but for a whole pile of reasons, we've been working home offices for 7, 8, well, even before we founded the company, for 10 years plus. Right. So this is not a big change for us in any way. The new normal is our old normal.
What are some of the things that you found challenging, or maybe on the opposite, like actually even making more productive or whatever by working from home? Mm-hmm. Because it seems like in the past where companies were, well, we don't want you to work at home because, we can't keep tabs on you. You're not going to be productive, and all those kind of like, the old broken record of like, now with COVID and people forced to being working from home, and with a lot of businesses that can do that. Yeah. Now suddenly the pendulum swung to the other side, and people are like, hey, wow, okay, people are, still as productive, if not more. But what are some of the things that you guys found out, as you've been doing this for quite a while, that worked well, and things that you guys are like, maybe there needs to be some improvement?
Yeah, the fact that we have such flexible work schedules, all of us, we highly value that. We love it. It's wonderful to have some flexibility. And if I want to go upstairs and have lunch with your spouse or kids or something like that, you can absolutely do that. It's also been a lot easier to make the adjustments when there have been lockdowns or closeouts and had the family or kids or whatever closer around. The one part of that has always been just a little bit challenging is because of that flexibility. Well, when do I know that I can get in touch with you? Well, we kind of solve that in our case by having regular desk phones through a voice over IP system. So I can call on the desk phone. You can choose to have it forwarded to your cell or not. Mm-hmm. And if they don't answer, they may not be available. They may send you back an IM or a text message that says, I'll call you back. I'm in the middle of a conference call. So sometimes availability can be a little tricky, but as far as productivity is concerned, it's definitely always for us been way more productive working from home, way more efficient. There's none of the lost time in a commute.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that. I mean, that alone, even considering, let's say, very modest and average, let's say, 30-minute commute.
Mm-hmm.
That's an hour a day that suddenly you have that extra hour. What can you do with that, right?
Well, and beyond just the time, and I love the time, I will definitely not minimize that, but you and I, before we started the session, we were looking off the porch at the beautiful valley here, and during a lot of the close down, the air was a lot cleaner because so few people were driving. Right. Yeah. And while it's not as bad as it could be, I'm all for much cleaner air, and I love to drive less. I drove up here in my hybrid, of course, and I love the as much as we like our civilization and our culture and our smartphones and all of that, being able to get back to nature, going camping, getting out in the middle of nowhere somewhere, and being able to disconnect is just as important to me as having the toys at home when I want them.
It's that work-life balance that a lot of companies and people are talking about, because they do see that people who have the availability of doing work at home and being able to spend more time with family, or being able to have that extra hour a day because of not having to commute. I mean, that's 5 hours a week. Mm-hmm. That's 20 hours a month. That's quickly racks up, and that's time that you can really relax and just recharge and be just more productive. Yeah. So that's, I think there's a huge. I just hope that we're not going to go back to, after this whole COVID, that we're not going to swing back into like, all right, come back to the office, everybody. And
of course, there are some people who simply have jobs that they have to be done in person. And hopefully we're clearing the roads so that they'll have a more pleasant commute. Right. Hopefully they can listen to a good podcast and unplug on their way to and from. Right. But by having less traffic, because those of us who don't really have to be there in person aren't there 5 or more days a week, it can really help improve the quality of life for everybody around us.
Switching the topics a little bit to, because we kind of talked a little bit about, the sort of future, and I want to tie in the future of innovation, and education tied into this, how we can, what's being done in Utah, and what can be done that you see in terms of helping kids, get into that mind space where they want to build things and create things. And what have you seen out there that people who have kids could introduce kids to kind of get them started on this journey of exploration, of building things and breaking things and taking them apart, putting them back together and building something new? I mean, a lot of things that are shaped in our society are shaped by these innovators from the past. Tesla, Edison, massively impacting, our society. So what can we do to have our next generations, be productive in terms of innovation?
Yeah, I think one of the first things is we need to find the right balance in education of learning what we need to learn, the basics of it, and learning to ask why not, what else can we do, how can we do something differently. You have to, in a classroom environment, there has to be a balance. You can't have the kids always jumping up and saying, well, let's build ourselves something new in the middle of the class, because it'll be very disruptive. Right. So certainly there is a place and a structure for traditional classroom learning, but when it comes to things like programming, yes, a traditional classroom environment may be a great way to learn the syntax and the basics of computer programming, maybe even building some basic applications, something like that. But projects, some kind of project, is really important as far as getting them really excited and interested in continuing to work in the field and wanting to pursue a career in that area. In the schools here in Utah, they have what they call CTE, Career Technical Education courses. I go whenever I get the opportunity and go and talk to classes in the local schools. Haven't been able to go much lately, of course, but I go and talk to them about a lot of the kinds of things we do every day, creating new products and things like that. And I get both sad and happy at the same time, because a large portion of the class is just sitting there with that blank look in their eyes, and I can see I'm not getting through to them. And a portion of the class, their eyes just light up and they're really paying attention. They're asking the questions.
Right.
So I don't know how to get the other half excited about it. Maybe it's that it's simply something they're not interested in. Maybe that group is full of, the next great authors and so forth.
Or maybe just timing. Maybe they're just not ready yet. Maybe it's going to be that one project that will excite them at some point, right? Recently, one of my guests on the show was Chris Sparzo, who's a member of Utah Make Salt Lake. Make Salt Lake, right? It's the makerspace, and he is part of a team that's building battle bots, right?
Those are fun.
Oh my goodness! And it's just such an amazing thing because, like, again, you have a project, right? So it's you're going to build a bot that's going to be fighting in an arena with some other bot, and again, so it's goal and purpose driven, and so it gets people excited. There's that sense of that competition when they're building those bots. How do we build it so it's is
robust. It doesn't get flipped over. It doesn't break.
All these different
doesn't catch on fire.
Exactly. And so I really see how bringing these types of things to the education system where exposing kids to see like what is possible, what can we do, because they might not even know what's possible and what's not possible. So you can kind of introduce them to that and learn, and then get them, and hopefully a project will get them excited about building something.
Yeah, and there's even some parallels to the way we do fine arts education in school. We have band and choir and drama, which I'm also a big fan of. All of them. Was big into that, especially when I was a kid. But in drama, for example, we do plays, a big production. And the difference between the technology education, where we actually have an advantage, is the project that you're doing for your drama class is a big play, and you tend to have a few people that have lead roles, and most of the other people tend to kind of blend into the background. So a few people are getting great opportunities, unless you can find a really good ensemble cast show, which is challenging. But when you do it in the technology space, every single student or group of students, if they want to team up and work together, can come up with something amazing. Maybe in its own way, and it may be small and it may look simple, but for them it's amazing because they've done something they had never done before, they may not have even imagined before, and they realize these things are within their grasp.
Right. Let's now switch in another direction. Yeah. I put a bookmark, so I want to make sure that I talk about this, because this is maybe not controversial topic, but it's something that I'm interested in hearing your opinion on. And it's strongly bound to open source. Open source software, which is projects that you have Linux, you have Apache, these huge open source projects that are literally impacting the whole planet. Linux is running, majority of the servers on the internet. Apache is the web server that's running on top of that. So huge impact, on the planet, on the whole society, and how internet is built and everything. And yet those projects started off as open source, no money, none of that kind of profit motive, so to speak, right? And so my question to you is, how do you see the juxtaposition, the open source on one hand, no money, people volunteering code, building things, and then on the other side, intellectual property, proprietary development of proprietary systems that often take stuff from the open source, tweak it, and then make it their own, and kind of go and build on that. What are your thoughts on the balance between those two? Yeah.
First off, one of the things that when we're working with clients and utilizing any kind of open source anything, we always try and encourage them or to either themselves or allow us to contribute back to that something. Especially if we're making any kind of modifications, the license requires it anyway, but we're trying to be altruistic and also help grow that. So if we find bugs or anything like that, we're trying to submit patches and pull requests and have them try and improve it. I am not really an expert on the legalities of what can be used and what's not used, but we really like to have people using and helping to build on top of open source of all kinds. So a lot of the products we help develop ultimately have some type of open source core or something
component,
in it. Yeah. And not only are you getting just the the product itself, but in a lot of cases, you're getting an entire ecosystem of people and support. There's a parallel to be drawn to the makerspaces like Make Salt Lake. Those are the people who are, for the most part, altruistic, doing it in their spare time for free. Yes, they're paying a membership fee to be part of the space, but that's just to be there.
Right.
And then they're helping people out for no payment at all. But sometimes those people, like the people we just talked about, might be coming there because they want to build a commercial product. Well, for the most part, as long as you're explaining that from the very beginning, they'll understand you're trying to build a company out of this and make something, and they'll still be willing to help out with that kind of potentially commercial product. So there's definitely a coexistence that can occur, and it probably happens more often than is even acknowledged, that things are literally stolen from open source projects, and I'm really unhappy about that, but I'm also not sure what you can do without creating constraints that then tie the hands of people who are fairly and honestly using the open source projects.
Right. We see it's a tough problem, the open source software and now open source hardware, and I'd like to talk about that as well, because you on the one hand you want to bring in something that they want to share, and if you have the means to support that, then you can do that altruistically. But at some point, if you are developing something that needs to be somehow monetized so that you can continue building it out, right? Then it's like it's a tough challenge to do that. The things that I've seen out there are, once an open source project is so mature or like accepted by community, and other things are built on top of it, then an opportunity opens up in kind of supporting that open source, right? So then you can hire, because once you build a commercial product on top of open source, you want to make sure that that is patched up, that it's the functionality. So you have, as a commercial entity, vested interest in making sure that the open source project continues to flourish, because your product is built on top of that. So there's that mechanism of maybe commercial, and
that model has actually been used quite successfully. Things like some of the browsers, and Apache is one of those good examples of a project that is open source, but there's also commercial support offering available. Right. There are quite a few of them like that, where they can build a viable business model on top of support, but you really have to create a pretty substantial critical mass before you're going to have enough of a customer base. Yeah. Another example that's a little bit different than that one is probably the Arduino business model, the electronic open source prototyping platform. So it's open source hardware and software. It's built on a compiler that's GCC open source, and it's built on a hardware platform where the circuit boards themselves are actually open sourced. And what you see now is you can buy the official Arduino from the actual company that makes it in Italy, and maybe the board is $20, and I would encourage people to continue supporting them that way. Or you can buy the copies that come out of low-cost manufacturing countries, where the circuit board it's just the open source design, and it's $7 or $8 instead of $20.
Right.
And in that case, you're not supporting the organization if you choose to get the copies. And that's, of course, a personal choice. You can choose to do it whichever way you want, but that organization, Arduino, lives completely on donations and by selling those boards. So otherwise, you can get online, and every time you download their compiler, they ask if you would be please willing to donate, but they don't force you to in order to get it.
To me, this is always kind of a... because there's that clincher. You build it enough of that critical mass where people are using your product, and then if you make it open source software and hardware, then I don't want to call them profiteers, so to speak, but that those manufacturers swoop in and they just get a freebie, and they're like, okay, we're going to mass produce this, we're going to sell it at a half the cost. And then it's really up to people to make that decision of supporting it. But that's not a sort of like, it's a sort of a fickle business model, because then you don't have any guaranteed revenue, right?
And I think there's even a spectrum of the sort of profiteer versus altruistic perspectives.
Right.
Because even the most open source project, something a lot like Arduino, open source compiler, open source hardware, open source software, well, you're still using microcontrollers that are commercially purchased from a manufacturer. So there's sort of that profit motive for them.
Right.
But somewhere along that spectrum between well, I'm just knocking it off to make an extra buck completely on the backs of those who gave it away, versus, well, I need to have enough of a viable business model because I can't afford to manufacture chips in $1 billion fabrication plant unless I sell the chips for $1 or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's right. Open source software on the one side of the spectrum, and then what's happening right now, there's more and more of open source hardware, which is basically designs of products and builds that are shared. So if you want to build a, brick pressing machine or a tractor or a auger or a CNC machine or a plasma torch CNC machine that cuts steel and things like that.
And a lot of those projects are on one of these sites that's not all of them are done yet, but they're in concept phase.
Right, exactly. and it's happening more and more, and the business model of that is quite different as well, because again, we're talking about real physical things. In a way, software has it's easier because it's easier to
copy.
Yeah, exactly. Like type it in your basement or whatever, and you just submit it to a site and it's done. It doesn't have as much of a upfront cost in taking it to that place where open source hardware is. But I'm going to put a plug-in over here. Open source hardware. OpenSourceEcology.org is a nonprofit that's making a lot of contributions in this space. And I had the founder, Marcin Jakubowski, on the show over here, and we talked about open source hardware and how he is planning to literally change how we think about hardware. And he's got a very interesting story. Super smart guy who's in this space right now, PhD in physics, nuclear fusion, unbelievable stuff, and he's really just pushing forward the open source hardware. And parts of that is, and I want your opinion on this, because we talked about briefly, I think it was offline, where we talked about built-in obsolescence of things. Businesses build things, and if they build them too well, they are literally cannibalizing their own business, because if I build something that lasts forever, well, you don't need parts to it, you don't need to replace it, you don't need to buy, a new thing, which is great in terms of me as the consumer, but bad for you as the business, which is building those things, right? And then on the flip side is, something that you mentioned, which is like because of these things break down, whether they have built-in obsolescence, so they are designed in such a way that they will break at some point sooner than later. So that you can buy a new thing, and now that goes into the garbage. That landfills filled up with these things. Open source hardware allows you to literally be part of a community in which you could literally just, because you have the schematics, you know how to fix this thing.
Print a new part.
Yeah. Done.
Yeah.
Fixed. And now you're not contributing to the waste creation of all the plastic and everything that goes into building physical things. What are your thoughts on that?
I love the idea, and at the risk of making a statement about intellectual property in general that I might regret, but it seems like way back to the founding, at least of this country, the whole idea in the original Constitution and everything was the idea of intellectual property, copyrights, patents, trademarks, are to give the inventor, the creator, the exclusive use of something for a limited period of time, in exchange for then giving it to everybody afterwards. So we're making society better as a whole. So all we're doing is delaying the ability of society to use it for free for a certain period of time. And in some ways, the all of those legal protections might be, on copyright, it may be way too long. When you talk about software, if you've got a 100-year copyright on it, is that software really going to be of any use to you 100 years from now? Maybe, maybe not. Should that one actually be a little bit shorter so that society can benefit from it? Or should we at least have like an escrow for source code? So if you want the copyright protection, you need to escrow it. So if your company goes out of business, we can't have somebody buy it up and lock it away, and then we've lost that as a society. So same thing with the open source ecology. Love the stuff that I've seen. I believe I was browsing through that site. That's what I was talking about because you referred me to it earlier. That's not only making the world a better place, but providing tools that people will be able to use basically forever. And they're open source already. And yes, it has to be copyrighted by an organization, but it's freely available for everybody. And if we can think about everything that we're working on in that bigger picture. Yes, I'm going to have a period of time where I can make money on it so I can take care of my life, my family, my whatever it is I want to do with my life. But then we are now giving to society as a whole, whether it's a new drug that we develop or a new thing that we invent or new music that we write or a movie that we create.
Right.
If we can give it to the world a little bit sooner, and find a way to make sure we're still compensated appropriately in the in-between time, then society as a whole will move and accelerate faster.
Yeah, what really attract me to what Martin from Open Source Ecology is doing is kind of tackling this what he calls a artificial scarcity, because the point that he's making is that there is enough of stuff over there, especially when we going to change the business model of things. Build a better drill that, if it breaks, we can fix it. If we need to recycle the plastic, we can literally just use that as material to kind of fix our own stuff.
Print it again.
and then the other aspect is the education part of it. If you have local businesses, these kind of like what he calls a micro factories locally in communities. Now you don't have centralization problem in terms of resilience of supply and demand chain, right? You can build things locally, you can fix things locally, you can recycle things locally. All of that is part of that ecology, that ecological system that he's talking about. And of course, the education aspect of that is like if you get kids early on, excited about this whole thing because they can build something, they can share it, and then by building this kind of collaborative environment in which people are now with internet and almost everybody connected on the planet to the internet, you can build these teams all over the world where they can rapidly accelerate development and improvement of things versus a cycle of development for a company that, let's say, builds a drill is like, okay, we got to lock it in because then we need to get the presses, the injection molding, everything set up, and then we have a run of a fixed amount of widgets, and then rinse and repeat the next year because now we have to have a newer model and what have you, versus having smaller micro factories where things can be done in smaller production runs, and that cycle can be accelerated much, much faster because then we can literally just kind of evolve the designs.
It also allows some things like mass customization, which is kind of a contradiction in terms, but say I want to make a version of the drill that's just a little smaller so it fits in a little more small, compact space, and another one that's a bigger, stronger version. They're just variations on the existing theme, but again, now one person creates that, and now the entire ecosystem benefits.
Yeah, so we'll see how it's going to be an interesting future to see how that shakes out. On the one hand, I see the need for intellectual property. When someone puts in that much effort and cost and time and money and sweat equity and all of that into building a product, they want to have that kind of protection before they kind of release it. But is it an old model? Maybe we need to evolve to the next level of like just this, share it early, and then become part of this system, this ecological system of taking it to the next level. I mean, in a way, it might be very arrogant to think that you, the creator, have all the answers into this widget that you designed, right? Maybe by collaborating with 10,000 other people, you can evolve it so much faster and so much higher that it just gets to that space where it's like much, much better than anything that you could have potentially designed and produced. And the benefit of you doing that sharing is that you still get the credits, you still can produce it locally and have that market still, and hopefully people will recognize that and wanted to come to you as then a manufacturer potentially of that new widget. I don't know. We'll see how things shake out, but it's going to be interesting. I'm very excited about that space, and see how, especially that it supports small businesses locally. It supports community. It supports education. We want those kids to be engaged in this and in it, and see that it makes sense to kind of be part of that a system like that where they can build, share, collaborate and still make money and live and a living off of it. So,
and there are a lot of other benefits that go along with that. The kind of local manufacturing, you're reducing transportation costs, fuel and pollution and things like that.
Right.
All, again, just additional benefits along with everything else you just outlined. But yeah, getting the, especially the younger generation started on starting and running their own business is really helpful. I like to joke about it, but both my parents were teachers, at least for a while. Eventually, my mom stopped being a teacher, and she took over the family business that my grandfather had started. My dad continued as a college professor until he retired. So I've got a little bit of the teaching bug in me. That's why I like to teach online and do some things like that. But worked at the family business, which was a greenhouse. We'd grow garden plants for people's, grow their own fruits and vegetables and flowers and things like that. And myself and all my siblings, and there are a lot of them because there's a big family, we worked out there really, really hard in the heat all the time. But we learned to work, and we also learned that we didn't want to work at the family business, so we all got college degrees so we could go and work somewhere else. But how do you inspire that kind of work ethic? That's an entirely different question, maybe an entirely different discussion, but it goes hand in hand with the learning an important skill. And it doesn't have to be technology. Not everybody is interested in technology. Right. And it's very important that all of us recognize that just because the person doesn't know my skill set doesn't mean they don't have something very useful to offer. They may have soft skills and human touch skills, storytelling skills, and all of those, or the business mind or whatever, all of those are very important things, and we don't want to minimize those. And frankly, without getting into a political discussion, if we could do that when it comes to discourse nationally, when we're talking about political issues, if we could find that common ground a little bit and come together, we can form much better teams, more effective teams at every level, and be much more productive individually and as a society.
Jeremy, what are you passionate about outside of your line of work, or maybe connected to line of work? What are you passionate about in the near future, in whether it's innovation space or product development or ideas development? What are some of the things that are kind of like high up on your list that you are excited about, that you can't wait for them to finally come out or impact our society?
Wow. There are probably way too many, and I'll go off on some crazy tangent or whatever. But the thing that has been a big discussion in our house recently, especially with some of the events that have been happening in the world, both socioeconomic and in terms of global pandemics and all of those kind of things. I'm definitely not the right person to be in authority and leadership or something like that in a political office. But I really wish we could find a way as a people, as a group, to find some common ground. And if we instead of looking for ways to divide all of us from one another, and this happens all across the political spectrum, I'm not speaking of any party, any one group at all, right? People are looking for ways to divide us because that unites a small portion of us. But if we could look for that common ground, and I just applied it to the business world, and it's important there. But if we could do that a little bit more in the big world, in the world of our neighbors, our friends, our people we don't even know, if we can seek out that common ground first and make a friend, we'll find that we have more in common than we have not in common.
Right.
And we also gain the perspective. If we get to hear those stories from other people, the hard times that they've been through, the reason that they might be protesting against a system that they feel is unfairly treating them, and similarly, if they're also willing to listen to others and find just that one little piece in the middle where we can meet, then maybe we can find a way that all of us can coexist a little bit together, but even more than just coexisting, because that's just not enough, but we can thrive together.
Right.
And learn to work together towards a common goal. Yeah, we're not going to agree on all the goals, but if we can agree on a few goals and work together on those and kind of leave the rest of them up to more individuals and smaller groups.
Any candidates that you think about that would be, good maybe seeds of inception into the bringing that what you're talking about, like bringing people together, building that common denominator?
Here I'm gonna get in trouble now in one way or another.
Perfect.
There are probably lots of great candidates who I think because we have, at least here in the United States, this two-party system where we've just been bifurcated into one or the other for the most part, it doesn't leave a lot of room to find that common ground.
Yeah, I call it the, specifically with respect to politics, I call it the sports team mentality to politics. It's it's almost like a win-lose proposition. My party has to win, then yours will lose, as if, we couldn't focus on ideas that are merit-based instead of like the label-based, like, my party versus your party. Anything else?
Along with that, I see things that give me hope, because I'll go into the news sites and look at the comment boards, and most of the comments just make me cringe and sad on both, if not every end of the political spectrum. But when I see the comment where somebody is sympathizing, somebody gets sick. A most recent one was Ruth Bader Ginsburg had become ill, and some people who disagreed with her were, well, good, she should retire. I saw some comments on the other side that said, look, I really don't agree with her positions and her rulings, but I wish her all the best as a person.
Right.
I hope she gets better quickly.
So empathy.
Yeah. A little bit of that goes a long way, I think. And no matter where you are on any spectrum of interest, business, political, or whatever, just trying to reach out to people a little bit can help a lot. Yeah, we're not all going to suddenly agree. We're not all going to stand in a circle and sing Kumbaya together.
Right.
But we can at least get along a little more.
Yeah, I like that. It's not only empathy. It doesn't have to be that you are
agree.
Agreeing.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's because a discourse has to have challenges to look at different perspectives so that you can hash out what really stands on its own merit versus just like, it's my idea, it should win, right? But the empathy part, I guess, comes in with allowing people to better understand your side and be at least open to perspectives. And it's through shows like this one that I enjoy learning from smart people like yourself and getting different perspectives, being open to that. And I think that's something that as a society we can kind of nurture a little bit more, so that before judging or jumping into conclusions, we have that two cycles in our brain. So like, hey, let me think about it. Maybe there's something to it, right? So it's kind of like more of what I hope for in the future. What about technology-wise? What are you excited about?
That was the real question. That was the technology part. Yes.
In the near future, what are some of the technologies that you are excited about? I mean, you're seeing a lot of different products that are being brought to you. A lot of things that maybe are waiting for that next chip or that next invention or that next component that's going to take it to another different level. What are you excited about? A
lot of them that I really get excited about. Again, a lot of these we can't talk about what we're doing in the medical device areas, because none of the clients that we work with there we can. But I can talk in general terms about some of the amazing things that are coming out. I mean, even this one has been around for several years. They have something called a lab on a chip. I had that backwards, and it's just a single tiny little chip, and you can put a blood sample on it, and it can take all kinds of different measurements, measure blood glucose in case you have diabetes or something like that. They have others that will test for innumerable things. I think some of the explosive detections are based on lab on a chip.
Right.
And some of those kind of things, someday for our friends and neighbors who suffer with diabetes, rather than having to have the permanent monitors that are with an embedded whatever it is, if they could have something that was more like a pacemaker built in with a battery that will last for their lifetime, that could then monitor and keep track of it, things that make a difference to a lot of people every day, make their lives better.
When you mention lab on a chip, what came to my mind was what was the name of that company that was very controversial? Theranos or something like that. Maybe probably mispronouncing that, but it was essentially a company that wanted to do something like that, whereas a lab on a chip where you could just provide a small amount of blood and run all these different tests, and everybody was telling them that they couldn't do it, but maybe technology has advanced since their failure, and maybe that's going to be happening in the future. I know it's DNA testing. I think some of the stuff that already can be done on a chip. So very very exciting stuff. And
I always tend to go towards what kind of technology, what kind of gadgets and whatever, because I am kind of a gadget person. I like to build things. And yes, a lot of things that come to mind are those, right? But I realize in my more thoughtful moments, that those things really don't necessarily make our lives much better. They might make it a little more convenient, but what are the things that will make our lives better overall? And improving people's health, whatever form that takes, is an important one. And we just love to be able to help out with those kind of projects.
Talking a little bit about you and your background, you kind of told us a little bit about kind of what shaped you, what got you into the this space of engineering and building and having, founding this business. What are some of the things that you would want to share from your personal experience over your, the length of your career, whether it's a failure or anything that you thought of as a downside, but then it turned out to be an upside? What are some of the things that you've learned in your life and things that reinforced where you are right now?
I've got a few things that I usually talk with. I'm on some of these little social groups with alumni of colleges and a couple of places like that, so that I can get connected with students.
Right.
Sometimes that turns into people that end up actually joining and working with us. But more often than not, it means I take them out to lunch and talk to them about their career opportunities when they're getting closer to graduation. Wonderful. So several of the things I tell them fit very much with what you're asking. So the big one with sort of the failure was, I went to a couple of different startups in search for the big payout, and neither of them really panned out. The first one that I went to, I would have done much better if I'd stayed at the previous company just with the stock options I'd already had there. And it's just a nice, great growing company that's been on the top 50 places or top 10 places to work or whatever forever. So those little startups that failed taught me a lot about, sort of a slow and steady wins the race is a better approach. Save carefully. Get yourself an emergency fund. Don't live on credit. And when you have your financial life a little bit more in order, it gives you way more flexibility in your career life. Just being prepared that way. Again, sort of the plug for Dave Ramsey kinds of living. Being prepared and having a little bit saved on the side is really important to giving you the freedom you want in your career.
Peace of mind of being able to still pursue what you want while not being stressed out or financially coerced into doing what you don't want to do just because you didn't have that extra saved up. Right.
We all would have, if we hadn't had some savings, we all would have had to go back and get a day job when COVID-19 hit, and we've all continued to just work. And it was fewer hours, but so what? We're still doing the stuff that we love and not having to go out there. The other thing that I really encourage the young college students and high school students to do is to work on projects, a lot like the makerspace kinds of things. And I'm always coming at it from the device because we do a lot of embedded systems. It's a device connected to something. It's a smart watch or it's a phone accessory or something like that. But it can be any kind of project. If your interests are more in a mobile app, you want to build your own social media network that's way better than all of the existing ones, then learn to program that. There are plenty of free tutorials online. You can learn just about anything.
Right.
And frankly, you can probably get as much or more of an education off of YouTube now. If you're careful and you work hard and you stay focused on it, then you'll tend to get in a traditional school setting. But most of us just don't have the determination to stick with that. But do projects, because when you have that job interview, if you get the traditional college education and the traditional job interview and work for a regular company, which is a great place to start, having a project to talk about gives you a much better basis rather than just being able to answer their question on indirection in a C++ pointer.
Right. Nowadays, having a project, especially if you're in software development, you want to have a GitHub project that you contributed to, because that's saying more than your resume. And on your resume, you can say like, well, I know Python and C++ and all these different things, and I've done all these different projects. But when someone can literally just take a look at it and see the kind of like
they'll see your commit log, they'll see your commit notes, what lines of code you've changed.
It's your proof. It's your proof how what you are capable of doing.
Yeah.
What about like those who are doing like hardware stuff? I mean, I guess they can just prototype something to show, right?
A lot of the people in that space, they love the 3D printers. So start with a budget model and start printing and building things. That's especially good if you're into mechanical engineering. Use one of the freely available 3D modeling tools and start building stuff just to try it out. Yeah.
Speaking of 3D printers, what do you see? I want to see what do you predict is going to happen next with 3D printers? I mean, it's been more than I don't even know. sort of like a consumer level, definitely more than 10 years, maybe 15 or maybe even 20 years, that we kind of like, at first it was just a novelty, like, oh, look, I can print a little chess piece or something. Yep. Now you have these things that are like literally, you can print out a engineered tool that's going to be lasting and working tool, not just a prototype, something you can kind of like this, but in metal. Now you can literally just like this, and it's in metal, and I just printed it out. What do you think is going next?
I think more durable materials will help a lot, because there are certain types of models that, like the tool, the drill or something like that, it's going to need to take pretty high impact. And the regular plastics, even the higher impact plastics, might still not quite be there. To the real extreme, even before the 3D printer revolution really happened, there were working systems called selective laser sintering, where they'd take a metal powder and turn that into pretty solid metal objects. And perhaps that's one of the next ones, is bringing something like SLS to the desktop, maybe. Or it may be something I've seen at some other maker spaces where they'll 3D print in ordinary plastic an item, and then they do a lost, kind of like a lost wax casting, where they put it inside plaster, melt out the plastic. Don't want to do that too much. The fume's not so good. In that case, it'd be better to use a 3D printer with wax.
Right.
And they cast metal parts from them. But there are still a lot of steps to those processes, and holding tolerances can be challenging. But some of those kind of things are great. And really, the 3D printer revolution has continued to happen under our noses, and we barely even notice it as we continue to 3D print things. And yes, some of them are like one of our engineers whose 3D printer is running nearly 24/7, printing out printable lightsabers with really amazing handles and the extendable blades, and you can put LEDs on them. Really amazing parts. He does some really cool stuff on his printer. But the more practical kinds of things, more than just the toys, and having those ecosystems you talked about, the printable parts of real useful objects, is part of that.
Yeah. Maybe recycling somewhere in that as well, being able to recycle the plastics and really extrude the filament and basically make your own cheap material. Like somebody else's garbage can be your treasure.
Just a machine that grinds up the parts. Somebody's probably got one, and melts it down and produces intolerance filament.
Yeah, it's. I think in fact, Open Source Ecology, they have open source project about that as well too, to actually grind up plastic and make filament and really just recycle and so super excited about a lot of those projects. What are some of the things that you're afraid of that this, the advancement of technology is going to do?
Well, there's always the concerns about privacy and what's going on in your own desktop computer. So using the commercial operating systems always makes you nervous. What are they giving access to? Apple seems to be pretty good at staying ahead of that curve. I notice in some of the more recent Apple Mac OS updates, you have to explicitly grant access to each of your folders and system settings to each program. And that's an encouraging trend. It's also a little bit of annoyance because you have to go and turn things on that you didn't really want to before. And I have to console myself by remembering, well, before this, it already had access to all of that anyway.
Right.
So I'm hoping that those trends for privacy continue and maintaining the security of our data. But I'm pretty sure that unbeknownst to most of us, there is a lot of data leaking out.
Yeah, I mean, in this modern world, and especially the younger generations right now, literally privacy is an afterthought almost. Like it's in fact, most of this stuff is like, hey, how can I share more about myself and all of that. So like a lot of people basically are just living in that space of contributing to social media, sharing and everything. So it's actually kind of interesting to see the dynamics of like what should we really protect and what is going to be available one way or the other because of how much data is being collected by companies on you. Like they know what you're going to want to purchase soon, with like all those different things and patterns and deep learning now and artificial intelligence is helping kind of get those tease out all that information about you so that stuff can be sold more.
And along those lines, I'll give you the same plug I give to everybody. Get a password manager and use it. If you don't have one, LastPass, I prefer 1Password. We've got the family subscription plan and we use it in the business and everything. I've got hundreds of passwords and credentials in there. Randomize all of your passwords. Then you only have to remember the one to unlock your 1Password account or LastPass. Use those because it's getting even more important. Someone breaches one site, and I know most most people. They use the password recipe,
Right.
and they have a base password, and they include part of the website name or something else. And, it's sort of secure, but until that password database gets breached over there at whichever company, and they look at the password and they notice the name of the company in there, and now they can reverse engineer your passwords at every other thing, including maybe your bank.
Right.
Though people tend to use a slightly different one for their bank. But use a password manager. It's really important to protect your information.
Don't reuse your passwords, people.
Don't.
Just don't do it. Thank you so much. I think we covered a lot of ground and on and off topic, but I wanted to, I love speaking with engineers. I love picking your minds because you tend to see the patterns and the themes that are kind of emerging in your line of work and are like futurist in a way because you see where things are going next. You can extrapolate very well. Anything that you want to kind of, this is your time to give a shout out to the listeners, to whether they're local or global who are listening to this show. Maybe advice to inventors or entrepreneurs or maybe younger folks who are thinking about doing some things. What is it that you want to kind of send off as a message?
So, of course, I will shout out to my wonderful spouse and kids. They're amazing. But also just to everybody out there, you may be looking at me and you may not identify with me as being somebody like you. But some way, you have some unique gifts, some unique talents, interests, whatever it is. You have something important to give to the world, and don't give up on that. Look for ways to contribute. Go and learn something new. Go and learn 3D printing, programming, whatever it is. And you can find some way to contribute to the world in a good, positive way. And the more of us that do that, the better off the world is going to be. Instead of people saying, well, that's just the way the world is, let's all help make it better.
Jeremy, thank you for being on the show. Really appreciate it. What a wonderful message. For those of you who enjoyed what we were talking about, please let us know. Subscribe, share, provide us some feedback. What is it that you liked about this? What else would you like to hear more? And share your story. Reach out to us. And we're always looking for interesting people that bring in interesting topics and share interesting values and experiences that others can benefit from. So thank you again for listening to this podcast. I'm Adrian Sinclair, and thank you for joining us. And until next time, build things and contribute. Thanks for listening to the Adrian Sinclair Show. You can find previous episodes on the Apodcast multi-channel network at apodcast.com. You can also stream this podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Podbean, and other audio platforms. And if you subscribe to our weekly newsletter, you'll get convenient short summaries of podcasts you may have missed. So check it out. And lastly, please, please, please support us by sharing our episodes on social media. We really appreciate it. Thanks.